The property management company for his neighborhood had been equally unhelpful. Have you tried asking her nicely to stop? The representative had suggested, as if that thought hadn't occurred to him. Eric paced his kitchen, checking his watch. His rideshare to the airport would arrive in 90 minutes. He'd been looking forward to this vacation for months. A chance to escape his demanding job as a software developer and the stress of city living. The last thing he wanted was to spend his vacation worrying about an entitled stranger using his home as her personal parking spot. His phone pinged with a notification from the neighborhood social app. Someone was complaining about the lack of convenient parking near the shopping district. Several comments suggested that homeowners in the area should share their driveways when not in use. Eric closed the app with a disgusted snort. The audacity of people never ceased to amaze him. Eric's finger hovered over the garage door button as an idea crystallized in his mind. He'd recently upgraded his smart home system, including a new garage door mechanism with enhanced security features. One of those features was a vacation mode that disabled all external entry methods except the primary remote, which he'd be taking with him. This is ridiculous, he told himself, trying to dismiss the thought. I can't just trap someone's car. He paced his living room, rehearsing more reasonable options. He could call the non-emergency police line again. He could leave another note. He called. His phone pinged with a calendar notification. Order RIDESHARE2ARPORT 19 AMUTs. Eric walked to his window again and looked out just in time to see Diane meeting another woman on the sidewalk. They air-kissed and laughed loudly enough for the sound to carry, pointing toward his house and clearly sharing some joke at his expense. Something snapped inside him. He tried being nice. He tried being assertive. He tried being official. Nothing worked on someone who believed rules existed for others. His decision made, Eric pressed the garage door button, watching the door lower and lock with a satisfying click. Then he activated vacation mode through his smartphone app, which triggered several security measures, including disabling the internal emergency release cord. With methodical calmness, Eric finished his packing, set his home security system to send all alerts to his phone, and taped a note to his front door. Away until September 15th. For emergencies, contact Mrs. Wilson at 555-0123. As his rideshare pulled up, Eric took one last look at his quiet house and allowed himself a small, vindicated smile. Eric's parents lived in a remote cabin in northern Michigan with spotty cell service, one of the reasons he treasured visiting them. By Saturday evening, however, he found himself hiking to the highest point on their property, where 1 or 2 bars of reception occasionally appeared. His phone exploded with notifications as the signal connected, 17 missed calls, 24 text messages, and several voicemails, all from the same unknown number. There were also 3 alerts from his home security system showing motion at his front door. The first voicemail started professionally enough. This is Diane Reeves. Your neighbor gave me your number. My car is locked in your garage. Call me immediately to resolve this. By the third voicemail, the tone had shifted dramatically. I've missed 2 important client meetings. Do you have any idea who I am? I will sue you for lost income and emotional distress. The 8th voicemail was just sobbing and threats. Eric also had a text from Mrs. Wilson. Some very angry woman keeps coming by. Says her car is in your garage. Should I be concerned? He replied simply. She's been repeatedly trespassing despite warnings. Police are aware of situation. Please don't give her a key if she asks. What Eric hadn't anticipated was how fascinating the security footage would be. His doorbell camera captured Diane's transformation over days, from indignant confidence in designer clothes to increasingly disheveled desperation. She'd brought a boyfriend who tried to force the garage door. She'd attempted to sweet-talk Mrs. Wilson. She'd even tried to convince a locksmith she was Eric's sister who had accidentally locked her car inside. On day 5, she appeared with a police officer who, after some conversation that Eric couldn't hear, simply shrugged and handed her what appeared to be a business card before leaving. Eric zoomed in on the footage. The card was for a civil attorney. Eric should have felt guilty. Instead, He felt something he hadn't experienced in months: peace. He turned off his phone and rejoined his parents for dinner, genuinely present for the first time since arriving. When Eric's flight landed the following Thursday, he had a decision to make. Part of him expected to find his house vandalized or a lawsuit waiting. Instead, as his rideshare turned onto his street, he spotted something unexpected: a professional detailing crew washing his driveway. Diane's silver Mercedes was nowhere in sight, but as he approached his front door, he found a large gift basket with an envelope attached. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. Asterisk, Mr. Thompson, I owe you an apology for repeatedly using your garage without permission. My behavior was inexcusable. The garage door has been repaired. It needed minor alignment after my boyfriend's attempt to force it. Your driveway is being cleaned, and I've enclosed a gift card to compensate for your trouble. I've also made a donation to the Neighborhood Association for new no unauthorized parking signs. Please contact me if there's anything else needed to resolve this matter amicably. Diane Reeves asterisk. Eric stood bewildered, key in hand. This was not the outcome he had anticipated. As he opened his garage door, he found the space empty and spotless, cleaner than he'd ever kept it himself. A business card was taped to the wall with another note. Asterisk, the car was removed by professional transporters this morning. Again, my deepest apologies. Asterisk. Later that evening, Eric's doorbell rang. He opened it to find Mrs. Wilson holding a plate of cookies. Thought you might like these after your trip, she said, then lowered her voice. That woman came by yesterday with a notarized letter allowing a tow company to retrieve her car. Seems she had quite the week. What happened? Eric asked, genuinely curious. Mrs. Wilson chuckled. Apparently she's up for partnership at her firm, and when she missed those meetings and couldn't explain why, well, it didn't look good. But the real turning point came when her car being unavailable meant she couldn't drive her mother to an important medical appointment. Her mother? Eric felt a pang of guilt. Yes, but don't worry. The mother called me. Found my number when Diane left her phone unattended. Lovely woman, completely different from her daughter. Said this might be the wake-up call Diane needed about her entitled attitude. We had quite the chat. 2 weeks later, Eric received an unexpected email from Diane's mother, thanking him for being the catalyst for her daughter's attitude adjustment, and sharing that Diane had begun therapy to address her lifelong entitlement issues. Sometimes, Eric reflected as he pulled into his newly respected garage, the most effective consequences aren't the ones we plan, but the ones that. Eric Thompson slammed his coffee mug down on the kitchen counter, sloshing the hot liquid over his hand as he watched the now familiar silver Mercedes pulling into his garage again. This wasn't some shared apartment complex with assigned spots that could be confused. This was his private home, with his private garage attached to his private property. Unbelievable, he muttered, grabbing a dish towel to wipe his burned hand. The Mercedes belonged to Diane Reeves, marketing director at some downtown firm, according to her license plate frame. She wasn't a neighbor, just an entitled shopper who had discovered Eric's conveniently located home near the upscale Westfield shopping district. Despite confrontations, warning notes, and even calling a tow company, who refused to remove a car from a private garage without explicit police involvement, nothing deterred her. Eric had documented everything: dated photos, videos of their interactions, and copies of the notes he'd left that she'd crumpled and tossed onto his driveway. The police considered it a civil matter and suggested he install a garage door opener, which he already had, but Diane had mastered the art of slipping in right behind him or catching the door before it closed. Today, Eric watched through his window as Diane emerged from her car wearing oversized sunglasses and a cream pantsuit that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. She didn't even bother closing the garage door, simply clicking her car locked and strutting away. The smirk on her face when she spotted him watching from the window made his blood boil. What made today different was the packed suitcase by Eric's front door. In 3 hours, he'd be boarding a plane for a week-long vacation to visit his parents across the country, his first real break since the pandemic. Eric grabbed his phone and snapped several photos of Diane's car in his garage, adding them to the growing digital folder labeled parking violations. He'd started the folder as evidence for the police, but it had evolved into something of an obsession, a chronicle of one woman's extraordinary entitlement and his own mounting frustration. The first incident had occurred 3 months ago, on a rainy Tuesday. Eric had been on a video call when he heard the distinctive purr of a luxury engine in his garage. He'd rushed downstairs, rain jacket half on, to find Diane rummaging through her trunk. "Excuse me," he'd said, maintaining politeness despite the intrusion. "This is a private residence." Diane had looked up, genuine surprise on her face. "Oh." The garage was open. "I thought this was overflow parking for the shops." Eric had explained that no, this was his home, not public parking. She'd apologized profusely, seeming embarrassed, and he'd accepted her apology with good grace. People made mistakes. Except the next week, she was back. This time, her excuse was that she'd be just 5 minutes while she returned something to the boutique across the street. When Eric objected, she pulled out a $50 bill. "For your trouble," she'd said, as if his private property were a valet service with an established fee. He'd refused the money and asked her to leave. She'd seemed offended, as if his refusal to be bought off was somehow unreasonable. The third time, she'd arrived while he was backing out. She'd honked, gesturing for him to hurry up so she could take the spot. That's when Eric realized he wasn't dealing with confusion or misunderstanding. He was dealing with deliberate entitlement. Since then, it had become a bizarre cat and mouse game. He'd installed a security camera, which captured her picking up and discarding his warning notes. He'd confronted her multiple times, each conversation more heated than the last. He'd even printed out and laminated a custom "No Parking" violators will be TOWE sign, which had disappeared within a day. Last week, in a moment of desperation, he'd called a towing company, only to learn they couldn't legally remove a vehicle from a private, enclosed garage without police authorization, and the police wouldn't authorize it because it was a civil dispute over private property access.